I never planned to stay that night, but when my friend's mom poured 2 glasses of wine and whispered, "Don't tell him about tonight," I knew this was a secret that would change everything. I hadn't planned on staying late. The night had already wound down, my friend had gone upstairs, the distant sound of his door closing leaving the house unusually quiet. I was halfway to the door myself, shoes in hand, when I heard her voice. "Don't rush off just yet," she said softly from the kitchen. I turned. She stood beneath the warm glow of the ceiling light, sleeves of her blouse rolled back casually, a half-smile on her lips. There was something unhurried about the way she held herself, as if she wasn't ready for the night to be over. "I was about to open a bottle of wine," she added, tilting her head slightly, eyes meeting mine with a calmness that felt both inviting and dangerous. "Stay a little. Just for a glass." For a moment, I hesitated. It was late. I should have said no. But there was something in her voice, something that carried a quiet loneliness under the surface. And maybe, something else. I set my shoes down by the wall. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart had started to pick up its pace. She turned back into the kitchen, and I followed. The air smelled faintly of oak from the cabinets and something floral from her perfume. I watched as she reached into the cupboard for glasses, the soft lines of her hair catching the light as it fell over her shoulder. The simple act of pulling the cork from the bottle seemed almost deliberate, her hand steady, graceful. The faint pop of the cork broke the silence, followed by the smooth rush of red wine spilling into 2 glasses. She set one in front of me and kept one for herself, her fingertips brushing the glass's stem like it was part of some quiet ritual. "Cheers," she said gently, raising her glass just enough to meet mine. The sound of crystal meeting crystal was soft, almost intimate. I took a sip, the taste full and rich, but it wasn't the wine that caught me, it was the way she watched me over the rim of her glass, her eyes holding mine a fraction longer than necessary. The house around us felt different now, emptier, quieter. The laughter and noise from earlier were gone, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the muted tick of a clock on the wall. Everything else had faded, leaving just the two of us in that golden light. And for the first time that night, I realized I wasn't simply a guest anymore. I had been invited into something far more private. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the wine glasses between us catching the soft light. At first, the conversation stayed safe, small talk about the dinner earlier, a funny story about her son when he was younger, things that made us both laugh. But as the minutes passed and the second sip of wine warmed my chest, something in her tone shifted. Her laughter faded into a more thoughtful quiet. She traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, circling it slowly, her eyes fixed on the dark red liquid as though it carried memories she wasn't sure she wanted to speak aloud. "You know," she began, her voice softer now, "it's strange how quickly life moves. One moment you're young and everything feels possible. Then suddenly," she paused, searching for the right words. "You blink, and you're looking back instead of forward." I leaned in slightly, sensing she was letting me into a part of herself most people never saw. "Do you ever regret things?" I asked. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a second, I thought she might deflect. But then she gave the faintest, almost sad smile. "Of course. Everyone does. Regrets, missed chances, words we didn't say when we should have." She shrugged, though the gesture seemed heavier than it looked. "I guess that's why moments like this matter." The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken. I wasn't just listening to her words, I was watching the way her shoulders lowered, as if she had finally put down a weight she carried too long. "I don't usually talk about this kind of thing," she admitted, her eyes never leaving mine. "But you actually listen. Most people just wait for their turn to speak." That landed in me like an anchor. I hadn't realized until then how much I wanted to be someone she trusted, someone she could lean on, even if only for tonight. I nodded gently. Sometimes all people need is someone to hear them. She exhaled, a breath she might not have realized she was holding, and her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Her hand brushed against the table as if she was debating whether to reach for mine. For a heartbeat, I thought she might. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was warm, like the stillness that comes after a song ends but lingers in your chest. And in that silence, I realized something had shifted. We weren't just sharing wine anymore. We were sharing secrets. The conversation drifted the way smoke does after a candle goes out, still present, but quieter, softer, almost uncertain of where to settle. We had both laughed, both confessed small truths over the first glass, but now the air between us felt different. Not heavier, exactly, more charged, as if the silence itself carried meaning. She leaned back slightly in her chair, tilting her head toward me as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The motion was unremarkable in itself, but the way her fingers lingered near her cheek, the way her eyes lingered on mine as she did it, it left me wondering if she knew the effect it had. Her perfume seemed more noticeable now, a faint floral note layered with something warmer, like vanilla that clung to her skin. Every time she shifted in her chair, the scent reached me again, subtle but enough to stir something I couldn't quite name. I found myself watching details I hadn't paid attention to before, the way her lips parted slightly as she thought, the faint crease between her brows when she remembered something that mattered. She wasn't speaking anymore, but her presence filled the room louder than words. I cleared my throat lightly, searching for something to say, something to break the tension. But the words that came out were softer than I expected. "You're different tonight." Her eyes narrowed playfully, though her smile carried an edge of curiosity. "Different how?" I hesitated. "Not in a bad way. Just, more real. Like I'm seeing a side of you most people don't get to." Her gaze lingered on me, steady, unflinching. And then, just for a second, her confidence seemed to falter. She lowered her eyes to the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her fingertip. "Maybe you are," she murmured. The room felt smaller. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed louder. My pulse matched the ticking clock on the wall. She reached for the wine bottle again, refilling her glass with deliberate slowness, as if buying herself time. When she slid it toward me, our fingers brushed. The touch was fleeting, accidental in appearance, but her hand didn't jerk away. Instead, it lingered a second too long, just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch, the subtle tremor in her fingers before she withdrew. And in that pause, that fragile space where neither of us moved, I knew, the night had turned. She leaned forward to take the bottle again, tilting it carefully toward her glass. The light from above caught the liquid as it flowed, ruby red glinting like something alive. I slid my glass closer so she wouldn't have to reach far. Our hands met at the stem of the bottle. It was nothing more than a brush at first, skin against skin, warm and brief, but neither of us pulled away. Her fingers rested over mine, gentle yet unyielding, as though she was quietly asking if I'd notice, if I'd respond. I noticed everything. The delicate texture of her skin. The faint heat of her palm. The way her breath shifted in her chest, slower and heavier now, as if she was aware of every inch of distance we hadn't closed. For a long heartbeat, I didn't move. My hand stayed beneath hers, still but alive with sensation. And in that stillness, I realized how loud silence could be. Her eyes flicked upward, meeting mine. Something unspoken passed between us, something neither of us dared say aloud, but both of us felt. She smiled faintly, not the polite kind she wore around others, but softer, almost shy, as if she couldn't decide whether to be amused or vulnerable. "I'm sorry," she murmured, pulling her hand back slowly, almost reluctantly. "That was clumsy of me." But her voice betrayed her. It wasn't clumsy at all. It was intentional, careful, testing. I swallowed, my mouth dry despite the wine. "You don't have to apologize." Her lips curved at that, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth beneath my words. She leaned back in her chair, glass in hand, but her body was angled toward me now. Not directly, never obvious, but enough that the air between us hummed with awareness. I took a sip from my glass, hoping it would steady me. Instead, the taste only deepened the warmth already spreading through my chest. The ticking clock on the wall continued its patient rhythm, but it felt like time itself had slowed, as though the world outside the kitchen no longer existed. There was just the faint scent of her perfume, the glow of the light, and the memory of her touch still alive on my hand. When I set my glass down, I noticed her watching me, her gaze flicking quickly away when I caught it. The smallest things, her glance, her half-smile, her hesitation, carried more weight than any words could. And though neither of us said it, we both knew something had already shifted. A line had been crossed, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet power of a touch that refused to be forgotten. The wine sat half-finished in our glasses, though I could hardly taste it anymore. What lingered wasn't the flavor, but the memory of her hand over mine. Even now, I swore I could still feel it, a ghost of warmth on my skin that refused to fade. She hadn't spoken in a while. Her gaze shifted between me and the glass she held, her thumb brushing slowly along the rim, tracing invisible circles. It wasn't nervousness exactly, it was something deeper, like she was standing at the edge of words she wasn't sure she should say. Finally, she set her glass down with deliberate care, her fingertips resting against its stem for a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. Her voice was low when it came. "Don't tell him about tonight." The words seemed simple, but the weight in them was anything but. They carried layers, playful on the surface, but beneath that, fear, and beneath the fear, longing. I sat back slightly, trying to breathe evenly. She was talking about her son, of course. About the way this evening would look to anyone else. But her eyes told a different story. They weren't pleading for discretion in the way of a parent protecting an image. They were searching me, testing whether I understood the unspoken truth she couldn't voice aloud. Her glass trembled slightly as she lifted it again, though her hand was steady when she drank. When she set it down this time, she pressed her palm against the table, grounding herself. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the wood, my voice steady but gentle. "You have my word." She tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest smile, though her eyes still carried a storm. "Our little secret, then?" I nodded. "Forever." The room grew impossibly quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with something heavier, something fragile. Her shoulders lowered, as if she had been bracing herself against an answer she hadn't wanted to hear. The relief in her exhale was subtle but unmistakable. And then, without moving closer, without a single grand gesture, she let her hand slide toward mine on the table. It didn't touch, not yet. Just close enough that the warmth radiating from her skin was undeniable. That space, those few inches of almost contact, felt louder than anything we had shared all night. It was hesitation and invitation all at once. And in that fragile pause, I realized, the secret wasn't just about tonight. It was about us. Her hand rested close to mine, just shy of touching. The distance between our fingers felt like a question, one I didn't need spoken aloud to understand. I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, the invisible pull drawing me closer. I let my palm turn ever so slightly, brushing against the side of her hand. The contact was feather-light, barely a touch at all, but it sent a shiver through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers shifted, slow and deliberate, until they rested over mine. It wasn't a bold gesture. It was quiet. Careful. The kind of touch meant less to claim and more to reassure. Her thumb traced a faint circle over the back of my hand, as if to say thank you, don't let go. Her eyes lifted to meet mine again. In them, I saw everything she hadn't said, loneliness, yes, but also trust, a hope she was almost afraid to reveal. The same hope that made her whisper earlier still echo in my chest, "Don't tell him about tonight." I swallowed, leaning closer without thinking, lowering my voice so it barely carried beyond the two of us. I meant what I said. Our secret, forever. She breathed out softly, a sound caught between relief and something warmer, almost tender. The tension in her shoulders melted as though I had lifted a weight she'd been carrying alone. Then, quietly, she shifted her chair closer until her knee brushed mine beneath the table. It was subtle, accidental to anyone else, but we both knew it wasn't. I turned my hand beneath hers, weaving my fingers with hers. The simple act felt more intimate than anything else we could have done. Our hands stayed there, bound together on the wooden table, a silent promise spoken in touch rather than words. She leaned toward me slowly, cautiously, until her shoulder touched mine. Her head found its way to my shoulder, settling there like it belonged, her hair brushing against my cheek. The sound of her exhale was steady, grounding. And for a moment, I could feel her heartbeat, not against my chest yet, but through the gentle rhythm of her breathing, syncing with my own. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let myself be the steady place she seemed to need. In that stillness, in the weight of her head resting on me, I understood, this wasn't about desire alone. This was about trust. About being chosen in a moment when she had every reason not to. And as I held her hand tighter, I knew this promise wasn't just spoken. It was sealed in silence. The house had grown impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that only arrives deep into the night. Upstairs, the world continued on in dreams, unaware of the small world we had built at the kitchen table. Down here, it felt like time had stopped for us alone. She stayed resting against my shoulder, her hand still in mine. Every so often, her thumb would graze lightly over my knuckles, a motion so simple yet impossibly intimate. I didn't want to move, afraid the spell would break if I shifted too quickly. When she finally spoke, it was barely louder than a whisper. "You don't realize how rare this is." I tilted my head slightly, just enough that my cheek brushed against her hair. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then let out a quiet laugh, the kind meant more to mask emotion than to celebrate it. "Being seen. Being heard. Most days, I'm just someone's mom, someone's coworker, someone people rely on. But tonight," her voice trailed off, fragile but certain. "Tonight I'm just me. And you didn't look away." Her words struck me deeper than I expected. I tightened my fingers gently around hers. "I wouldn't look away. Not from you." She didn't answer right away, but her head nestled closer against me, her body relaxing as though she finally believed it. For a long while, we sat like that, no more wine, no more words. Just the warmth of two people who had chosen to let down their walls. Eventually, she shifted, pulling back just enough to meet my eyes again. Her expression carried both softness and caution, as though she was memorizing this moment before letting it pass. Then, with deliberate tenderness, she leaned in and pressed a light kiss against my cheek. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was careful, lingering just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her lips and the meaning behind them. When she drew back, her eyes glistened, though her smile carried no regret. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't ask for what. I already knew." We stood together a few minutes later, the night finally nudging us toward its inevitable end. At the door, she pulled me into an embrace, her arms firm around me, her cheek resting against my chest. I held her in return, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine, the kind of embrace that says far more than words ever could. When we finally let go, she gave me one last smile, soft, private, and unforgettable. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew the truth. What happened tonight wasn't just a secret. It was a promise, one that would stay alive in both of us, forever. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romance tales. And share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what part of this night stayed with you the most.